Okay. Anyway.
So good morning, everyone. I let the floor to Microsoft as president of ELCA and Lucian Veneto to start the lesson.
Okay, thank you, Antonella. Thank you, the connected people for today. We have Mark Neil again with us, so we are very happy for our transatlantic connection for this new lesson on the USA market and public procurement. So I recall you that we are running now our digital training on public procurement in USA and Canada. We are on the lesson 7, module 2, USA, today, part 1. Okay, and today we have 2 hours training with Mark Neil again to deeper some subject about public procurement. About our training, so we are in module 2, so we are talking about eligibility requirement and assessment criteria. Okay, so we are now reaching roughly half of our training, and so today we are lesson 7, and we are scheduled our 2 hours of training with Mark again on the 21st of December, just for open your Christmas gift all together. So we are very close to Christmas, and after the same day we run the lesson 6B that we originally scheduled for today. So we have a little change in our scheduling for our training. Here you can see also in January, the 1st of February, the last 3 lesson that we scheduled for module 3 on this training. I just go to training topics, and after I ask Antonella to complete some changing in our methodology for our training. So I welcome again Mark with us for the module 2 eligibility requirements assessment criteria for today, with some specific topics on Buy American Act, some registration for suppliers, how to search for opportunities, eligibility requirements, evaluation criteria, and the award process. And it's going to finish with presentation so next week with the legal considerations, certification, barrier, common errors, avoiding bad practices. And so with lesson 8, we finished part 2 for the US market. So again, we have all the cluster manager from ELCA, Lucian Veneto, Cluster Lumiere, CCAT, and BIC connected today. Maybe some companies, but remember that we recorded all the lesson and we let them available with the slides for companies of the cluster interested to deeper the subject of public procurement in USA and Canada. And I finished my introduction. Maybe I ask Antonella to complete some note about some change in methodology that we have in the last 10 days after some mail exchange with all the teachers and all the people in charge of Trade to run this training program. So please, Antonella.
So as I told you by mail yesterday, we proposed to make trade, and in particular Mark Neil and Jan for the USA and Canadian market, to have some exchanges. We agreed on the digital training program, because as you know, it's quite difficult also for them to have so many hours, the remaining hours for the program. So we agreed to have a change, to dedicate some hours, 40 hours in total, for the elaboration of a specific step-by-step guidelines and manual for SMEs. So Mark, Neil, and Jan agreed to prepare these documents instead of online lessons that they can provide to us. So if you agree, this is the proposal to change the calendar. So if you can return to the previous mail, to the previous slide, I sent you the new calendar. As you can see, we will have 2 hours of lessons from now to the end of the period of the lessons. I sent you in actually the proposal to have the lesson 6B, so the Canadian part 2B, on 19th of January. But Jan wrote me that for him it would be better the 21 of December. So if you agree, the 21 of December, we will have 2 hours with Mark Nate, so the second part of the essay, module 2. And after we finish with the lesson C, that we have to finish the second part with the 2 hours with Jan. And after the module 3, in 2023, with only 3 lessons of 2 hours, one the Canadian market that will finish our path on the digital training, and after 4 hours with Mark made on the USA market. So this is the proposal and the change. So I think that all the data, the dates were confirmed because we didn't change the dates, but only we reduced the hours of the lesson. So if you agree, we continue with this proposal. So if you have any comments, if not, I let the floor to Mark Neil to start his 2-hour lesson. Thank you.
All right. Good day, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you might be. First, I want to say thank you to the leadership here for those changes and for accommodating us. I know that that was not easy, so thank you very much. All right, so let me jump right into module 2, part 1. And hopefully y'all will be able to see my screen. Can someone confirm, please?
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so where are we? So the purpose of this training is to provide the Extra Light membership with information on the U.S. public procurement system in 3 general areas. So we've completed module 1, the general features of public procurement. Today and next week, we will run into eligibility requirements and assessment criteria, actually getting into practically what do the RFPs and what does the procurement process actually look like as you're going through it. And then finally, in the January-February timeline, we'll be speaking about the buyers themselves within the U.S. government and how to build partnerships with them and within others within that ecosystem, as well as how to find out things about your competitors and what does that look like. All right, so today what we will cover is there were 2 items from module 1 that this membership asked for me to go back and research. Those are the Buy American Act, as well as SAM registration with a specific lens towards what if I'm only a supplier? What if I'm not bidding on any contracts? What does that mean for SAM registration? I would ask that you go back to module 1 for information about SAM registration. I'm happy to answer any questions here if those do come up. We'll also look for how to search for opportunities. So there's a couple of free tools. There's a couple of pay-to-play tools that are out there. And so we'll look at each one as examples of what might be in the marketplace and how each differs and the different features and functionality so that you can be empowered to go do your own searches and figure out your path forward. We'll also look at eligibility requirements. We did touch in module 1 about the GPA under the WTO. But we'll hit on a little bit of that again, as well as some of the FAR and miscellaneous exceptions. So how can specifically European companies participate in U.S. public procurement is what we'll cover in section 3. Section 4 is evaluation criteria. So we'll look at bid conferences and bid opening procedures. We'll look at evaluation procedures and criteria, as well as if you're lucky enough and good enough, you get an award. What might that look like, and what does the award process look like? Again, with all these trainings, I like to just set the ground rules. So this is meant for European businesses who are seeking to participate in U.S. public procurement. So that could be at the federal, state, or local level. So my guidance here might be different if you're a U.S. business versus a European business versus maybe an Asian business. Companies new to the U.S. market. So if you've got little to no experience, that's more or less what this training is for. And then companies that do have U.S. experience but are unfamiliar with, bidding on government contracts. Maybe you've had success in the private sector. And then companies seeking entry into the mid-level introductory. So we're going to go beyond the 101 or 102 level. We're going to get into some practical examples and some details. But this is any topic in and of themselves can be actual training sessions of themselves. So a little bit about myself. I've got about 10 years of experience within the U.S. Sector here, bidding on both government and private sector contracts. I used to do commercial operations for a Fortune 10 company here based in the U.S. And then I have experience at all levels, federal, state, and local, not only bidding on contracts, but actually winning those contracts and what that looks like. I'm based out of the southeastern United States, out of the great city of Atlanta. So that's a little bit about me. And then some ground rules, question and answer. If you've been in any of my other sessions, I'm very informal. So please feel free to interrupt me at any point to ask for clarifications, maybe some of the words I'm using, acronyms. You'd ask for me to explain those. I'm happy to do so, not a problem. This training is meant for you, so please interrupt me. Some topics might be larger in scope, so I might ask that if it takes more than a few minutes to answer a question, we put those in a parking lot and we get to those at the end of the training where I can spend more time and maybe let others go, those kind of things if we need to. Digital etiquette, please mute yourself when you're not speaking. In this new day and age, trying to be forward thinking there. Also, the intentions is this is meant to be educational, informative. Your specific company needs may differ from what's in here as a general training. And so I would ask that you look at this training through that lens. All right, let's get into Module 1 open items. So the Buy American Act, otherwise known as the BAA, Bravo Alpha Alpha. In this section of the training, the goal is to help you understand what is the BAA, what it is and what it isn't. Also, I want you to understand the key terms because the definitions really do matter around what different parts of the rules apply and what parts do not. And then exemptions. So I'd like for you to understand how you might comply or qualify for a waiver, or how you might actually not even need a waiver and how you can actually move forward with your products as is. This topic, I believe, was asked by someone from the Italian delegation, if I understood correctly. I will give a disclaimer here that this is a very complex topic. It has very specific definitions. And failure to comply with these can actually result in fines and possible legal actions. So what I'm giving here is meant as a high-level guidance to help familiarize yourself with the parts of the Buy American Act. What are some common understandings? What are some areas to look out for? If you do wish to pursue U.S. government contracts, I do ask that you seek a Buy American Act expert because as you'll see when we get into these definitions, it can be very much up to interpretation or prior case law that could be very specific to your industry or to your country. Okay, now that that's over with, what is it? So the Buy American Act, the BAA, was originally passed in the 1930s. There have been some incremental updates. So the context here is in the 1930s, what we refer to here in the States as the Great Depression was ongoing. You had protectionism, anti-trade sentiment was pretty high. And so President Hoover went in and decided to, with the help of Congress, enact the Buy American Act. So what does it actually do? It encourages federal agencies to procure domestic materials and products when possible. Now that has a lot of different interpretations as we'll get into, but that's the broad scope of it. Where do you actually see the Buy American requirements? Well, as part of the federal acquisition rules, you'll actually see it in Section 52. So are y'all still seeing the presentation, or are you now able to see the website?
Presentation.
Okay, let me get to the whole screen. All right, folks. So for here, what we're seeing is this is actually section, this is what it looks like. It is most government documents, most government types of requirements here will be laid out in this very dry, very legal manner. So I kind of want to get you used to understanding what it is and what it looks like. You can see here that they have an effective date. So you can see the last time that this was updated would have been in late October around Halloween for us. And so that way you can understand if you're looking at a new update or if it's like fairly dated. And then you can see in here some key terms that we'll get into. So something that's called COTS, commercially available off-the-shelf items, and it has very specific definitions underneath. So most of these sections will start out by defining the different terms. So there's something called a domestic end product. We'll also look at that. We'll look at cost of components and what that might mean. And then you can get into all the legalese around which chapters apply. And, you know, there are some call outs for different types of parts. You can see where maybe there were some lobbying efforts with Congress that, you know, fasteners or just odd things that you wouldn't normally expect to get exemptions are specifically called out. So it's always nice to go in and look at these things and understand, you know, if there's any specific carve outs for your industry, maybe you got lucky there. So then let me go back to the presentation. All right. So the BAA does mandate that that for domestic end products. So again, you're starting to see terminology used here. To be manufactured in the United States, it must both be manufactured here and a majority of the product's contents also need to be sourced domestically. So what does that mean? Sourced domestically. So that starts at 55%. We'll actually get into this in the next slide. Will be better for this. So what does it actually mean? It says that the cost of the components, so it's not a percentage of one material versus another. It is simply a measurement of cost. So let's say, for example, in a lighting fixture, cost 100 euros to produce. One thing we might look at here is to say, does 50 euros and 1 cent is the cost, can that be attributed to components that were mined, produced, or manufactured in the USA to meet the definition of this end product? So it's okay to have 49.9% of your euro cost other than the US, but at least 50.1%, over 50% would need to be mined, so the materials produced and manufactured. Now, there are times where you can be audited. This isn't common, but it can happen where you might have to actually work with your suppliers to produce documentation that backs up these claims. Another item here is that it might be required to actually be manufactured in the US. So not only are the components, the cost of it is 50% or more, you're actually, the place of manufacture could be in the United States. So as a general rule, I would say for this audience, European lens specifically, you want to avoid having your product classified as what's termed as an end product. We're going to want to look at something called COTS, or commercially available off the shelf, and we'll get into what that definition means. So now let's stick with this example. Let's say that you do not qualify as a commercial off the shelf product. You're an end product, and cost is the determining factor in whether or not you meet not only the percentage, but also the required manufactured location. So what does cost of components mean? Again, here's a very specific definition. It's acquisition costs. You can have transportation costs. So let's say you've got to send your lighting fixtures on a boat from Marseille, France to the Port of New York. That cost can be attributed to the cost of the components, as far as counting towards your 50% if you're using a US transportation base, maybe FedEx or UPS or something like that. And then you're also looking at some of the other things like duties. So maybe if a tariff applies, if you've paid the tariff on a good, that can count towards your 50% of the cost. And so it's again, It's very important. Words matter, and how they're defined matter here. Also, let's look at what does it mean for manufacturing here in the United States. You can look at overhead costs. So there's administrative costs with your company. So there's getting the purchase orders issued or following up on shipments, personnel costs. These are all things that are considered overhead. Maybe there's utility bills, other things like that. If those are US-based cost for you, maybe one of your resellers. So you're based in Europe, but you've got a reseller here in the United States. And the reseller is part of your product offering, meaning that the only way the government can buy from you is through your reseller. Then those costs can start to count towards your 50% manufacturer cost here. I'm going to pause here. There's a lot of specific language here. I want to know if there's any questions on the term end product or the definition of cost.
I just want to ask you, Mark, one thing.
Yes.
You said that we, as a European company, we might be audited, or who is making this kind of checks, and if there is any certification or any certifying body that we should contact, or that we, I don't know, we must be aware of?
Yes, great question. So you as a European company will not be specifically targeted for an audit because you're European. Let me restate this for clarity. Any contract. So there are US-based companies that supply materials to the US government all the time. And so I will just say companies, period, whether it's US, European, African, doesn't matter. There are audits that are done periodically at random. So the random sampling of all contracts just to, as a compliance measuring tool, how compliant are our contracts? Are people following policies? So there's always the random chance that you could be audited. So that is to ensure that whatever's being sold to the US government actually does comply if it's classified as an end product. So you specifically as a European company will not be targeted. It's just any company supplying to the US government has a non-zero chance of being audited. Now, again, there was something like 5 million contracts, and there's only so much time and people you can do at this. So the chances of you getting audited are not super high given some of the statistics I've seen. That said, the second part of your question, are there any certifying bodies? Yes, there are. In the next module, we'll talk about certifications, not only industry certifications, but maybe some environmental certifications, and I'll make sure to include the specifics for the BAA in that certification list. But you can achieve a certification from that you are BAA. You can get ahead of your audit, if that makes any sense.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions? All right, so I started at the worst, and now I'm going to draw it back to the better. All right, so this is the term, again, terms matter, that I would recommend that this group try to adhere to as much as possible, and this is going to be your best bet for getting into the US market. So this is termed as COTS, C-O-T-S, so commercially available off-the-shelf item. So again, what does this mean? It's defined in paragraph 1. So there's a whole section in paragraph 1 that defines what is a commercial product for acquisition. And so does your product meet that? Second, it needs to be sold in substantial quantities in the common marketplace. So let's break that apart. Substantial quantities. That's not defined. That is an ambiguous term. But if you sell your product through Amazon.com or the European equivalent of that, or your lights are available in a hardware store or in a grocery store section for home goods or something like that, or however you make your of items available, if the random public or businesses, not the government, if the private sector, personal or business, can buy your products off your website, through a distributor, through an online marketplace, all of those things, then you likely qualify under this. And then also, the item needs to be offered to the government in either a contract or a subcontract, and we'll get into the subcontract part here in a second, at any tier. So without modification, this is the key term here, and we'll actually get into an example of what this might mean. But essentially, your item is sold as is, and Yes, there might be some installation involved, some work to get it, put up in the ceiling or something like that. But the item itself doesn't require further assembly, meaning you don't have to add other parts to it. It's sold as is. It's a complete configuration. So if you are looking to enter into the US market, one of the strategies I would recommend would be to look at how your product is packaged and how it is sold. If you are able to sell it without modification, meaning the end user doesn't have to buy 3 more parts to go along with it, so you sell it as a kit that comes together, then and it's sold the same way as you do in the commercial marketplace. So now item 3 is tying to item 2. Then you qualify. So again, you qualify as a commercial product under the definition of paragraph 1. Folks in the private sector can come and buy from you, whether it's online or at your store or through a distributor, and you offer it the same as you do to the private sector, you offer it to the government, and there's no further modifications required to the product. Now, with everything in this, and I show these to show you examples of how kind of like I give you general guidance, but there's always specific areas that we need to be mindful of. Here it says bulk cargo doesn't count. It also says, agricultural products or petroleum products don't count. I know this doesn't apply to the trade group, but I think it goes to a larger point that within all of these rules, whether it's Buy American or it's, eligibility criteria or whatever, there's always little carve outs that folks may or may not need to be mindful of. Okay, so I'm going to ask, are there any questions here for what does a commercially available off-the-shelf item mean, given what we've covered so far? Okay. So let's go through an example use case. So for me, I always learn best when I see 2 things, kind of head to head. So we learned about domestic end product. So this is something that we can infer based on the definition of commercial off the shelf that requires modification. So the example here is I'm going to say an HVAC handler. A common way of knowing this is like your air conditioning or heating system in a building, those large units that have the thermostat, that have the ducts and blow everything out. So in this example, project 123, they're building a new office building for the Department of the Interior. As part of the RFP, you got an HVAC system that needs to be purchased. So the HVAC system consists of different parts. You've got the furnace, you've got the metal ducts, you've got the control unit on the wall that you can set the temperature at. You've got an air handler, a louver that moves up and down. I think my point's made. You've got different parts. Now, each of those parts in and of themselves would likely be considered a commercial off-the-shelf product. There's no further modifications to them. The duct is the duct. The control unit, it is what it is. Like, you're not adding more parts to it. So while those may all be Buy American or not, it's considered a system. And so there are different words we can use, but this, again, I'm trying to be very generic here for the example here. But if it's more like a system, then it might be classified as a domestic end product. And so therefore, it's likely that this HVAC unit, if you were trying to sell it, would not qualify as commercial off the shelf. And now all of the criteria around needing to have the item manufactured in the United States and the 55% cost component levels now start to apply. Well, let's look at the other example. So let's look at a simple light switch. Project 456 is for renovating an office for the Bureau of Land Management. And they want interior lighting, they want to update some of their components, and they're seeking not only purchasing, but installation help as well. So their scope is they need 100 sets of light switches and 100 sets of light fixtures. A light switch is a light switch. That's a separate individual thing. You don't necessarily need to replace a light fixture to do the light switch. Conversely, you can also replace the light fixture instead of the light switch. And so those would not require modifications. Come as is, simply install it, turn on the power, you're good to go. So in this example, if you can qualify in this way, under this definition, as a commercial off-the-shelf product, the Buy American Act doesn't necessarily apply to you. So I know I spent a lot of time defining these different items, but the reason we're looking at this so intently is if you are a domestic end product, then the Buy American Act applies, meaning the different thresholds, et cetera. The Buy American Act still applies if you're a commercial off-the-shelf item, but those thresholds do not apply. The percentage and the place of manufacture, because it's something out there and it's just it's a commodity. It's not a specific like construction project or a complex piece of machinery, those kind of things.
So Mark, if the lighting product is like a standard one, so the same that is available for purchase to the mass public, private or whatever, single persons, this is the COTS.
Yes,
If it
ma'am.
is a customized item or assembly, it must be personalized for a specific project, it can be classified as domestic end product.
Correct. And then
Okay.
this is where I would again engage an expert, because these are hand-picked examples to illustrate a point. But you can see very quickly how definitions, there's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of places where you can potentially be looked at as one way or another. And so that's why I would say if it's a simple just product that you're seeing, light switch. But if it's a more complex lighting fixture that has certain bulbs that need to be filled with a gas, or you have different lighting fixtures that need to have electrical components swapped out, meaning they run on 240 volt instead of 120, and someone's got to change the electrical components and it doesn't already come with a 120 volt plug, then you start getting into modifications. So you can see very quickly how something that might be in Europe considered off the shelf, if you have to change it for a US market, and those changes need to occur outside of just the simple purchase of the product, you can be classified a domestic end product here in the US. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, but this is so, for example, in Europe, we have a specific electricity plug systems, and the USA, they are different. So this is very stupid example, but so if there is a company that would like to commercialize its product in the United States and is not changing these plugging systems, they just want to take it, they will have to adapt it oppositely for the American market. So
Yes,
it will enter the definition of the domestic end product.
Yes, I would say in reading through this and the definitions, I would say yes, that it would likely be considered a domestic end product.
But if they will prepare all the the same product that is sold, but they will adapt it before, for the American, Canadian markets, the North American markets, because they know that this is these characteristics that need to be respected. How I can understand it? Can I say that it's going to be sold to the mass public? It's already adapted. You don't need to do some additional changes. How I can classify it in this case? Because it's extremely tricky to understand and to interpret what is considered the part.
Yes, and so that is why in my beginning slide I said let's see if we can. Let's see.
Yeah, you need to be expert everywhere.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying very quickly, it can be. So I think there's again, simple light switches, light plates, simple lamp, that's probably okay. And you've got the plug that's correct. Again,
yeah,
I like stupid examples. They're easy, they're simple.
Exactly.
Exactly. But very quickly you start looking at, changing out a ballast, or you start changing out. And again, I'm ignorant to lighting. I just know from my own shocking myself. So, when we start getting into the individual components, that's when it gets very tricky. But I would say as a general rule, if it's available for sale in the United States to
Yes.
anyone who wants to buy it,
Yeah.
and it doesn't say here, so substantial quantities, is that
Okay.
10? Is that 100? Is that 10,000?
Yeah.
That's very nebulous. And so it's again, these are all levers that you have to work with. But yeah, I would say you need to be, if you have a finished kit, that gets you most of the way there.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. No, these are great questions. All right. So then let's look at some recent changes. So this original act was put in place in the 1930s during the Great Depression as a reaction to, the international trade that was going on, and on just needing to protect domestic industries. Most countries were doing that. In 2021, though, we had an executive order. So that is where the president of the United States, in this case, Joe Biden, is able to, through his own unique power, separate from Congress, able to issue very narrow, very specific guidance on a range of items. One of those is around the Buy American Act. And so many times when a law is passed in Congress in the United States, there's a framework, like there are goals that are outlaid, or like, you know, we shall increase American domestic capacity by 60%. But then the actual implementation is usually left to committees or to other government agencies. So if, let's say, for example, there were environmental regulations, you would have the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Congress might say clean water needs to be, all American streams need to be clean to where you can drink out of them. Okay, well, what is the level that defines clean enough to drink out of? Well, the EPA might set that standard. And so Congress will set a broad law, and then the agencies that are charged with implementing those laws will define specific criteria. And then the executive orders are also meant as another way for clarification of the general statutes or the general laws to be enacted. So with that context here, ensuring the future is made in all of America by all of America's workers. So, you know, we're facing inflation. There's fears of recessions here in the United States. The war in Europe has, you know, complicated supply chains, COVID, you know, the zero COVID policy in China, the economic conditions. So you can see parallels between the 1930s and now, as far as, you know, headwinds to business. And so in reaction to that, and for me, reasons why things happen are important. And so this executive order was put in place by Joe Biden in 2021, and it actually went into effect in October of this past year. And so what did it do? Very simply, it increased the domestic content threshold from 55% for the end product up to 75%. And so that will happen over the course of the next 5 to 6 years. Is you'll see these percentages start to increase. And also a minimum threshold of 55% was established. And so again, I go back to say, hey, 50%, if we go back here to the cost of components, and we look at, you know, 50 to 55% needs to be in the US, again, it's super important to be classified as a commercial off-the-shelf product rather than an end product, because very quickly you could establish yourself here in the US in the next year or two, and then you could see yourself being pushed out because your product isn't 65 or 75% made in America. So it's not something that I think should stop you from considering being here, but I do think, again, go for commercial off the shelf. If you have to go with the end product, understand that the percentages are going to increase because of the executive order that was put in place in 2021. Any questions here?
I have one question that is a bit, like to say, maybe provocatory. Is the American market able to satisfy this request of 75%? In terms, are the American manufacturers really capable of cover the 75% in 5 years' time?
I could not have asked for a better segue into my next slide on this topic. So it's like we planned it.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries. So the short answer is likely not. Most of this is likely considered political. So politicians can say, I supported a law and we're raising domestic purchases by the US federal government, by 20% over the next 6 years. Yeah. And that's going to, give jobs to, the Ohio Rust Belt, and it's going to do this, it's going to do that. But what does it practically mean? And so you can see here that it's narrow because it's domestic end product. It's not covering commercial off the shelf. And then there are waivers. So now within the BAA, there are different ways to where the BAA does not apply. And there's a lot of them. So when you start applying a lot of these waivers, the amount of purchasing that is impacted by this increase in thresholds starts to be diminished. And so if you, and again, this will get into a strategy that I'm going to recommend. If you can classify yourself a certain way,
Yeah.
if you can qualify for waivers, then this doesn't matter to you.
Okay. So
So-
they put a lot of exit strategies inside this.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They want to stay in power. All right. So what are some of those waivers? What do those look like? You've got the Department of Defense. They are the single largest purchaser in the government. So this should tell you to the question that was just asked, how applicable is this? Well, there's a lot of carve outs for Department of Defense spending. And there's a concept called qualifying countries. We'll get into that in just a second. There's trade agreement waivers. So trade agreements are one-to-one agreements between the United States and a different country. So we have one between the United States and Israel. I believe there's one between the United States and Japan. There is not a trade agreement in place between the United States and Europe or individual European countries at this point in time. The applicable agreement that applies in this scenario would be the GPA under the World Trade Organization Authority. That specifically was excluded from waiver status. So simply, so you should take this away to mean that as of right now, if there's no changes made, European companies would not qualify for a trade agreement waiver, and simply the GPA itself would not be enough to qualify for a trade agreement waiver. Okay, so also, this is a question I think was asked in a prior training session, selling to US agencies that operate outside of the United States. So for example, the State Department with our US embassies, those kind of things. If you sell the product for use outside of the United States, the BAA doesn't apply to this. So that is, again, another strategy you could pursue, is selling to the State Department or the Department of Defense. So targeting who you're selling to is a really good strategy. Another one that would be super important is being underneath the micro purchasing threshold. So I'll show that slide again in a minute to reorient us what that means. But essentially, these are the lowest level purchases within the US government. And the level is determined by the price or the contract, the purchase order price. So in this case, I believe it's 10,000. And if it's overseas, it might be more. But if your sale is 10,000 or less, then the BAA does not apply. Said differently, if you are able to get in with a reseller and they're able to sell, they have relationships with all of the Veterans Administration hospitals in New England. So all the ones in New York, all the ones in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, all those states, and they're able to sell your lighting systems, $5,000, every week or so to different VAs, then the Buy American does not apply to this. If you start going over 10,000, then that's when it's important to understand, is it the cost of components, and is it an in domestic product, or is it a commercial off-the-shelf product? The other thing here is there are contracting officer discretions. So in lesson 1 that we had in this, the contracting officer is the person from usually the General Services Administration, the agency that's in charge of purchasing, or maybe they're directly within the military for the Department of Defense, but they're the single individual that's responsible for the procurement process. They are separate from the end buyer. So they have a little bit of discretion. So some of those might include, to the question was just asked about, can American companies comply with this? There might not be enough availability of products given supply chain shortages and inflation and all the stuff we're dealing with. The cost might be unreasonable. So maybe the cost of a product is, I'm not making a political statement here, but maybe there's union labor involved, and union labor is typically higher than non-union labor. And so therefore that product carries a premium of maybe 40% to support union wages. Well, we'll see here where there's carve outs about the cost reasonableness. Commissary resale, so this would be military bases. So if you sell your product within the military base, also if it's in the public interest. So that is a huge gray term. What that means can be interpreted in any number of ways. And so as long as you get approval of the contract officer and their superior, and it's deemed in the public interest, that can count as a waiver. And then information technology, which I don't think this would qualify as, but that's also. So you can see here between selling to the military, Maybe there's a trade agreement in a couple years or whenever that's negotiated. If you sell your products to maybe the State Department where they use them out in our embassies outside of the US, you sell less than $10,000 worth of product in any individual purchase order. So you could potentially have 5 purchase orders in a week, 1 each day. For $10,000, you sell $50,000. That's potentially a way for them to stay under the micro purchasing threshold and do it that way. And then you can see the contracting officer has a lot of discretion. Now, specifically on the cost competitiveness, if it is a large company in the United States, so think of some of the biggest ones, General Electric comes to mind for lighting. If their price is more than 20% higher than yours, then the contracting officer can use the unreasonable cost exception. If, say, for instance, it's offered by what's defined as a small business, and that's usually classified as number of sales per year or number of employees that the company has, then your price has to be, their price has to be 30% or more than yours for this to apply. So you can see here that, one strategy could be selling your product at, potentially a discount if you're able to take advantage of labor costs or maybe some other material savings or some way you're able to reduce your price. That's also a way to take advantage of that exception. Comments, questions here? Okay. So this is now the slide from a prior training where we're going to reorient ourselves to the micro purchasing threshold. So again, it's the furthest to the left in the screen. This is where they can place orders directly with you or through GSA Advantage. You're required to take a credit card, and there's minimum quantities that can be enforced on the order. So like maybe they say you have to supply 10, you have to supply 10. These are basically credit card over the phone orders, very simple, usually very small. And then the other thresholds start to get up, above $10,000, and then the other one is above $250,000. So as long as you stay in that lower threshold, then the BAA should not apply to you. Okay. So again, if we go back to the exemptions, so the first one here would have been under the Department of Defense, the DoD, and qualifying countries. So, and I know I'm using a lot of acronyms, so again, please stop me if there's something that you don't understand or I'm getting too far in the weeds here, but there's the FAR. So that's the Federal Acquisition Rules. That's the set of rules that we've been learning about that apply to all public procurement. There are special carve-outs for different government agencies, NASA being one of them, the Department of Energy, nuclear reactors specifically, and then the Department of Defense have subsections. So they have rules that specifically apply to them, separate from other standard government agencies, like say the Department of Education or Department of the Interior, those kind of things. This is referred to as DFARS. And in DFARS, specifically the Defense Federal Acquisition Rule subsection, there is a concept called countries qualifying countries. So this means that the United States and said country have a reciprocal defense procurement memorandum in place, meaning that their defense agencies have agreed in principle to supply defense-related materials to each other. So think NATO, for example. This is how practically the NATO alliance might be implemented when you're looking at suppliers to the various militaries within the United States and Europe. Here you can see the European countries that are specifically set up as qualifying countries. So if you provide to the Department of Defense and the DFAR section applies to the procurement, then you would be, if you're from one of these European countries, then you would be listed as exempt from the Buy American clause. Any comments or questions here on the department exemption or waiver here in the BAA?
I have only one. This DFARS, let's say, then to become a qualifying country, it's like bilateral negotiations, right? So it's United States government with the Austria government.
Bingo. Yeah, it's a one-to-one.
One-to-one. Okay.
Yep. So these would be similar to the Defense Department's like trade agreements. Think of them like trade agreements, but between defense departments. instead of countries.
Yeah, but they are not, because in the previous slide you showed that the GPA is not applying, that bilateral agreements, yes, here, so that they are trade agreement waivers, it's not added. So this is only for the Department of Defense with the specific, okay.
Yes,
Department.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
only for this, and not, for example, for Department of, I don't know, or Agency for Environmental Uses or something. No, only for this.
Correct. Yeah. So this only applies to
Okay.
Department of Defense. But I will say the Department of Defense is by far the largest single purchaser.
Yeah.
So when we go into the tools, I think one of the things that I was seeing, and I hope we'll see it today, is that many of the contracts that come up are listed for military agencies.
Yes.
Department of the Army, Department of the Navy, Department of the Air Force, those kind of things, the Pentagon, those kind of, anyways, yes.
Yeah, because I was connecting this also to the use outside the US, because we host a lot of military bases or military facilities in Europe that, of course, they need to purchase the products or services. So even if they are located in Europe, they are going through the, let's say, the governmental process, the federal process of tendering, but they might be more keen to purchase from the local producers or manufacturers that are already located where they are located themselves, and so this is something that we can also consider in the public procurement for this US.
Absolutely. And one thing you said sparked a clarification in my mind. So the Department of Defense, and then that third one, use outside of the US. If you sell to the US Army that happens to be located in Ramstein, Germany, and I'm sorry for butchering that name, but then you actually qualify twice. It's for outside the US and it's for the Department of Defense. Said differently, if you sold your lighting fixtures to Fort Campbell in Tennessee, one of the US states, then you qualify under the Department of Defense qualifying countries section, even though you're not outside of the US. I hope that made that more clear.
Yeah, it's
excellent.
Clear. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So again, I've taken you through a lot of rules, a lot of levers that we can pull and push on. So what does this practically look like if I was in your shoes and I was wanting to sell into the United States? What possible strategies or ways of working might I pursue? So strategy one would either be to have a local reseller here who can be in charge of selling to the individual government entities. So that might be Veterans Administration hospitals, it might be military bases, it might be whatever government agency physical presence. I would also consider potentially getting on a GSA schedule. So if you are able to sell your lighting fixtures on a GSA schedule, then we covered that in prior lessons. That's where you give the government its best price. You've gone through a whole process to get on their website. The GSA Advantage is their version of Amazon.com, and it allows any government agency to buy your product without having to go out to bid, because you've already confirmed for the US government that this is the best price that anyone can get anywhere. So I would, if you're using a reseller, I would pursue the off-the-shelf exemption, and then make sure that you actually qualify for that. And then regardless, I would also pursue selling under the micro threshold. So yeah, $10,000 may not seem like much, but if you're selling to each government agency is considered separate on its own. So if you sold to a Veterans Administration hospital in Buffalo, New York, and you also sold in the same day the same things to the Veterans Administration hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, those are considered two unique transactions, and each with a $10,000 threshold. So if you're able to establish a reseller network here, and you're able to, it would be a quantity type strategy where you're selling multiple $10,000 purchases or less each day, but those add up over the number of days, and that might get you to 200,000 in sales annually your first year, or something like that. So this is what I would pursue as like my lowest hanging fruit type strategy, is try to find a reseller or try to get on a GSA schedule. And we'll cover GSA schedule and how to do that in a later training, as well as like how to find a reseller. Defense contracts, I would target those. So again, we want to go after that DFARS waiver. Again, that first waiver we talked about on this list. And I would look at DoD contracts. And so you can filter by those. We'll look at how to do that in the tool here in a few minutes. And then cost efficiency. So this one, I'm not sure how practical it is, but if you're able to assess the market conditions and what people are selling their products for, if you're able to meet certain thresholds, depending on who you're bidding against, you might be able to qualify that yours is an economical option that the contracting officer can use their discretion to issue a waiver. Any questions on these high-level strategies or what's behind my reasoning there? Okay. All right, so some key takeaways. I beat this into the ground, so I won't spend too much time here. Again, is your product or service considered a commercial off the shelf or an end product? That really does matter. I would again target, are you able to go after specific exemptions that are easy, don't require a lot of paperwork, don't require a lot of input, stay under the $10,000 threshold. And then also, separate from the threshold, I might target Department of Defense agencies for whom I go after. All right, so now to the second takeaway from the Module 1 trainings. There was a specific question around the SAM registration and suppliers, and I want to define the term suppliers. So this is, in essence, the way I'm taking this question to mean is you do not actually bid on the jobs. You're not responding to the government. You're not engaging with anyone. You're using a distributor or a reseller to be your face and who does all the paperwork. You are simply supplying them with product. So I went back and I looked at the SAM registration process, and to apply for federal awards, grants, basically any money from the US government, the prime awardee needs to be registered. So this could also be an example where if you're able to find a reseller, you yourself would not have to go through the 15-page process we reviewed in an earlier module to register with the US federal government. Subcontractors are not required. So whether you're classified as a subcontractor, a supplier, someone other than who has the contract directly with the government, you're not required to be registered within SAM. That said, I would still recommend that you get something called a unique entity ID. So this is where you simply apply for an ID from the US government, that you give them some basic information about your company, and then you're able to provide that as backup to your prime contractor or your reseller or your distributor, just so that if they ever need it, it's there for them to use. Let's see. All right. So I believe that takes me through this part of our lesson. And I was wondering if there were any questions about SAM registration for suppliers.
No, from my side, no.
Okay. All right, so now we get into the pure module 2. So how to search for opportunities. Opportunities, the vernacular here could be basically procurement, anything related to procurement from the US government. They're wanting to buy something from someone. The goal of this section here is I would like to make sure that you understand the free tools available. Those free tools will usually end in a .gov URL or web address that will indicate that it's a government hosted site here in the United States. I would like for you to also understand how and when to use different filters, what some of the terms mean. You'll notice here when we start entering in some general searches that you're going to get a lot of what I'll term as garbage, things that don't necessarily apply to you. And it will be like looking for a needle in a haystack if you aren't able to properly filter your search criteria. And then also, I'd like you to understand some of the paid tools in the marketplace, what's available, what's some of the cost structures, so that if you are looking to pursue opportunities here in the US and you're looking to go direct, not do a reseller or distributor model, what maybe some of those business costs might be in addition to registration and some other costs that you might have to incur. All right, so the first one I'm looking to show you is the sam.gov website. All right. Excellent. So here is the sam.gov website. This is what it looks like when it comes up. And up here, you'll see how to get started to register for your unique entity ID. We just talked about that. What we're looking for here is just purely the search function. There are some other areas here, the data bank that you can look through contract opportunities, standard reports, those things, but you'll need to have an account and sign in as that. You can also look at the federal hierarchy, meaning which departments report into other departments. So maybe if you're pursuing a sales strategy with the Department of Defense, you would then understand how the Department of the Army relates to the Pentagon and so forth and so on. Here are some data services. So these are ways that you can extract file data. There's contract opportunities, there's exclusions, entity registration. I think under, let's see, there was one here. I'm not seeing it right now. Anyways, there's data on like BAA waivers, et cetera, but that's not really where you guys should focus. Where I would focus here is this all words. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to bring up any sort of opportunity related to lighting. Now under here, domains, said differently, these are different areas of the federal database that you can search. I would recommend looking under contract opportunities. And then you can search, again, it works just like Google or any other search. You can search for specific words or all words. I generally start with all and work my way to be more narrow as I need to be. And then there are some other filtering criteria, and please let me know if this is coming across well enough or if I need to make this bigger. You can further look by federal agency. There are a lot of them. You can also look at dates. So like maybe you only want to look at opportunities for the past month or for the past 2 weeks. Notice type. So maybe you are looking for, we looked in our prior lesson about the different levels. So there's sometimes what's called an RFI, request for information. There's an actual solicitation. Sometimes there's what's called a pre-solicitation, say that 3 times fast, announcement, where the government will say, hey, we're about to come out with this big bid for lighting or for cars. And we want to let the marketplace know that this is coming and you guys should have it on your radar. And this is what you can kind of expect. All the way down to award notices. You can search for justifications. We looked at sole source justifications, meaning if the government has to, for a specific reason, not go through the competitive process or not follow the purchasing tiers, they want to buy specifically from, let's say, General Electric or 3M, then they have to justify that. For this here, I'm just going to look at solicitations, and you'll already start to see things populate. So if I start applying any filters at all, and I've got lighting as my criteria, you'll see here on the right, and let's look at this here. You'll see which agency is issuing the procurement. So for instance, we covered in prior lessons that the Department of Veteran Affairs or NASA can actually issue their own procurement, whereas other ones like the Department of Education, they need to go through the GSA. So you can see here Department of Defense, and then the sub-tier is who's the actual purchaser, not just the agency issuing the tender or issuing the opportunity. So here you can see that, yes, it's the Department of the Defense, but specifically it's the Department of the Navy. And then you can see like which office it might apply to. Then here you can actually see the date of that the offers due. So you can also see, do I have enough time to reply to this? If this was, for instance, today is December the 14th as we're recording this, let's say this date was December the 15th, then I might not even want to look at this because I don't even have time to put in an effective bid. I just don't have enough. You can see the notice type, whether it's the original solicitation. You can see if it's an updated solicitation. So they do offer updates, and we'll actually see how that's done. And then you can see when it's been published and last time it was updated. Okay, so then I can also look for, remember we looked for concepts around set-asides. So maybe it's a small business, maybe it's a hub zone, or maybe it's a veteran, service disabled veteran owned business. So let's say your reseller is a woman owned business and she was a service disabled veteran. Then you can select woman owned business, and you can select a service disabled veteran owned business. And now you can see solicitations or purchase requests that specifically apply to lighting somewhere in the solicitation. And it also has the set asides that are specific to your reseller. So now you can say, very quickly, you can narrow down that if your reseller, for instance, wasn't a hub set aside, I wouldn't even look at those hub contracts. All right, and then you can also look for active or inactive. So inactive would mean that for whatever reason, the government needed to pull the solicitation. Maybe there were some errors, maybe their funding got reappropriated. For whatever reason, they're just not able to pursue it. Or maybe it's an older contract that's already been fulfilled. So if you're wanting to do historical research. All right, so if I'm just looking at lighting, you can see here that term is not necessarily unique enough. I'm seeing high pressure boilers, a 3-story barracks. We've got some assembly, but tactical equipment, maintenance, the maintenance on the facilities. You can see here that this isn't really applicable to what you're trying to sell as far as I understand your products. Now, the other thing that we can look to do, besides these different filters here, and let's see if I can get to the one. Remember, in a prior lesson, we talked about the NIAC code, or the product and service code. The NIAC code is the NATO, or the North American classification system, that allows the government to place each procurement against a specific category, so they know how to track spending by construction, or by utility spending, or mining, or however they're spending the money. And so for y'all's industry, it's going to be the 3351 is the first 4 digits of, I think, the 7 or 8 digit code, and it's going to be electrical lighting equipment. Now you can get specific with commercial or residential, or maybe there's light bulbs, but this is a very good way to start narrowing down, and not just relying on the word lighting, but now you're actually relying on the industry code, the industry classification. So now you can see there's a market survey to obtain lamps, the incandescent, tungsten, and halogen lamps. That sounds a lot more on target for what this audience may be interested in. Okay, you can see undermount task lighting for office furniture. We'll actually look at this one in a minute as a practical example. I just wanted to orient you with this free government hosted database. This sam.gov is the official US government place where all purchasing opportunities are listed. So this is where if you're looking at paid tools, or you're looking at maybe free tools that are not hosted by the government, they're starting to plug into these data services in this data bank, and they're using those APIs to then pull back this information, and then they're adding their own layer of analytics and different things that we'll see in a minute, but it all starts here. Are there any questions or comments about how to use the search functionality within the sam.gov website?
Yeah, I have 2. The
Yes,
first one, is it mandatory for all federal agencies and departments to use and to publish the tenders on the sam.gov, right? So, and then you always will find all the tenders available this time, because this is a mandatory for all the agencies.
For the federal government.
For the federal, yes.
Yes, but state
Okay.
and local, they'll have their own websites, and we'll actually see that in one of the tools.
Okay. And the second one, is there any possibility to see who was awarded by the contract?
Yes, you absolutely can. All right, so then that's a very good, so let's actually look for that. Let's use that as our use case. Thank you very much for giving me that. So let me reset some of these filters here. Let's do contract opportunities. You got a set that you're looking for contract opportunities before the rest of the menu will populate. And then we want to look at product or service. So again, I'm going to look at the code of 3351. So electrical equipment, just in general. Actually, let me go with I'm sorry, let me go with the more specific TL 335122. 32, okay. And then I'm going to look for the notice type. So what you're looking for in this question is what's termed as an award notice. So in this process, and we'll actually go through this, is the solicitation itself, the bids released, there might be justifications or updates, but when it's all said and done, you look for award notice. And so based on that, I'm looking for an award notice with in this commodity code. So I didn't see one there. So let me just go with a more broad commodity code. So now you'll see here multiple award schedule. And again, I haven't pre-vetted this. I'm just clicking in. This is the first time I'm seeing some of this. You can see history here, award notices. You can see here.
Can I see who was awarded and what was the?
So this is an example of the data, but you should be able to. I've seen it in here where you can actually see the actual awardees of this. And the database itself is like, I think anything else. Sometimes you can't actually see. Sometimes the data is not populated. But yes, you should be able to see this in here. The answer is yes. Because it is required information. Since it's public money, you have to be able to know who won it. Oh, here you go. Contractor award name, RMP Associates. They're out of Brunswick. They're out of Brunswick, Georgia. So for this specific award, for the furniture system, the contract, you'll see it here under award details. So it was awarded May 10th. Who was awarded and those kind of things. And then you also see the value of the contract.
Yeah. And they published information only about the awarded company, not about the competitors or bidders who took place. So
correct.
I see only the one who won and not all of them who were bidding.
Correct. And so this again is doesn't mean so they likely have the data. It's just they're choosing not to show it.
Okay.
Because I do see on the paid websites that you can start seeing other competitors, you can see who bid on the project. And so this information is available, but for whatever reason, the GSA is not choosing to show that.
Okay.
Yep. And so then you can start to see, this actually begins to show you why, yes, the free tools can get you so far, but if you really want to go into this, you kind of need some of the private sector tools, and there's a reason they exist.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Excellent. So then if there's no further questions here, I'm going to go back to the next presentation. And then we've got another free website, which is the government. So this one here is usaspending.gov. So this is a website dedicated to, so if sam.gov was dedicated to showing what opportunities are available to bid on or what the government's looking to buy, this website is geared more towards what did the government actually buy? This started out of a need in researching this was the different government agencies had the data, but the way they were categorizing the data, the different fields might have been different. They might have been using different data sets or data types. And so this website, this initiative was meant to standardize purchasing data across all of the federal agencies so that we could then look at the analytics and look at all the different things. So again, over here, it will work very similarly to the sam.gov or other searches that you may be familiar with keywords, et cetera. You can also search by fiscal year. So the concept here is the US government purchases things within a budget for a given year. Now, private companies may use, or you specifically may use January to December as your fiscal year or your year. The US government does not. October 1st through September 30th is classified as a fiscal year. Said differently, fiscal year 2022 ran from October 1st, 2021 through September 30th of 2022. So actually right now, even though we're in the calendar year of 2022, December, we're actually in the US government's fiscal year of 2023. Now, in these searches here, this database goes back and there was a data import. So the further back you go, the less reliable the data is, the less standardized it was, those kind of things. And so I found that my searches are more, have more richness to them. If I'm staying within, you know, the last 2 or 3 years, you absolutely can go back, but the quality of the data from what I've seen tends to get worse as they go back in time. And that kind of makes sense. So if I'm going to choose a filter of fiscal year 2022, so that's already closed, that's in the past, and I'm looking at the award type. So here I want to define some terms. So contracts, that's a normal RFP, that's a normal process that the government goes through, the bid document that you usually see, the type of contract. So then the contract that's an IDV. This is an indefinite delivery vehicle. And what that means is that the US government is looking to purchase concrete for the construction of runways at 10 of its bases. But yet the architectural plans are not done, and they don't know how long those runways are going to be. They know they need to buy a lot of concrete. They don't know how much. And depending on, you know, things that happen, they may need to buy more or less. So they'll put out what's termed as an indefinite delivery vehicle, meaning I want to purchase said thing, concrete in this example, for at a certain price for a certain quantity or an unlimited quantity. So maybe it's $4 per cubic yard. And that's what the vendor says. And I'll sell that to the US government each day and every day for a period of 3 years. Have as much as you want, as long as you pay me $4 per cubic yard. So that's what this type of contract is here. So, you know, you might see this in terms of lighting. How does it apply to this trade group? You might have an indefinite delivery vehicle contract where they say, hey, we're going to be renovating all US embassies in the world. Now, to try to get an exact number of lights and fixtures and all of that would require a tremendous amount of effort. Or they can simply say, hey, for a 3-foot long, 1 meter long light, we want to have a said price, and the government can buy as many of those as they want from you, and you just deliver them to the port of New Jersey, and we'll take care of getting them overseas, or however they're going to do it. You might see lighting on that type of contract vehicle. Okay. And then you can also search by all these different criteria here. So, but the product or service code, again, we're want to limit our search to again.
No, it's NAIC.
Yeah. Okay, you're right. Thank you. My eyes are starting to go like this. I've been looking at these things. Oh, come on. Okay, I don't understand why it's not coming up, because your industry code does start with 3351. But I don't think that's terribly important for this example. But let's just use lighting. And under the term of lighting, and I took off the fiscal year filter, you can see all of the different contracts that have been awarded under what's termed as lighting. And I imagine if you did the NAIC code properly, you would also see it by the lighting commodity code. And you can see the award amount, when the procurement ended. You can sort the data however you want. And then you can also see the recipient. So I'm, again, just picking someone randomly. Lake construction looks fun. I like lakes. You know, they've got 400 million that the government says has been awarded to this company. They've got 21 transactions. So you can also view the different contract awards for this vendor, the dates, the contract amounts. So this is they're likely a prime contractor. So they've registered in SAM, and that's why the government is able to provide all of this data.
Can we see also who contracted them? Who is the buyer?
I believe so. So award ID. So these numbers over here represent the specific award. and then you can go in and say
Okay.
Department of the Interior, and you can see that it was part of a parent award. So this was likely a multiple award contract, meaning they could have multiple purchase orders. And this just happens to be one of many purchase orders on the parent agreement. And so then you can see the classification code. It's, you know, for highways and streets, the product service code to repair and maintain them. And again, not a ton of data. It's not, you know, presented in a super sexy way or anything like that, but like, it again gives you the ability to drill in if you know a specific company that you want to search for or a specific type of industry.
Do they differ the data by the domestic companies and the foreign companies?
I wanted to say I did see.
If you select maybe, I don't know if this is kind of data that the.
So yes, the short answer is yes. I can take that as a takeaway for our next training to make sure I show you, but yes, you can. Yes.
Just to understand also what is the amount of the let's say the budget that they have that was spent on the contracts with foreign companies.
Correct. Okay, so that will take us through the free tools. There are other free tools, but those two I think are on the you know, purchasing side, what they're looking to purchase, and then the spending side, what has been spent. So now I'm going to go to one that I've shown you in some slides before. This one is GovTribe. So I'll again say I have no affiliation with them. I'm not, you know, recommending them over any other tool. It just happened to be one that allowed me to have a free period for a trial where I didn't have to pay anything, so that I can show you how a private tool might work. So again, you'll see here on the left, and hopefully you're seeing this this purple screen.
Yeah.
Excellent. You've got the federal contract opportunities. So this is what are the solicitations currently available in the marketplace. And grants. So grants is where the federal government will give you money to go do something. That this is typically for engineering or research and development type of, like, think laboratories would be or universities would receive a lot of grants. And then you've got the federal awards contracts. You can see here that the private tool, the pay tool, mirrors a lot of what the SAM tool has to offer. You can go by federal award contracts. You can go by indefinite delivery vehicles, grants. So you see a lot of the same items. You can search by category code, those kind of things. So the questions I'm seeing here are around, how do I research my competition? How do I see how big the industry is? So on this tool, I'm going to search for the NIAC category, the NIAC code. And again, this is at the federal level. This is not at the state or the local level. And here, I'm going to go with the commercial lighting. And then this is where we start to see the data for the different types of awards. So in this commodity code for commercial industrial lighting, what was the sales over the last 3 years, the last 5 years? You know, the awards. So how many unique awards were given? So you can see that this trajectory doesn't look very good, but it at least gives you some of the data. And then again, you can see who's buying. So here I would say, you know, if we're looking for that DoD type exemption, the Defense Logistics Agency, the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, you even got the Missile Defense Agency. You know, some of these I've never even heard of. But you can see here that of all the squares, and the squares are sized to represent the amount of sales. So you can visually see that at least half, over half of the total dollar amount of sales is to the DoD. So again, let's tie some concepts together. If I go back to the Buy American Act and I'm looking for the Department of Defense waiver for a qualifying country, if you're from one of those European countries that has that in place, then this, I'm looking pretty good at, as far as at least more than half of all sales were done through an entity that I can get a waiver through. Cool. So this is how you would start to look for different contracts. And then again, I'll just pick Hercules LED company, just randomly. So I can start seeing the types of funding, if they have those available, what types of awards. So this one, they didn't have a ton. You can see their company profile. Let's see. I should probably have some better examples than this, but again, you can see here that this is how you would start searching for different companies and what contracts they've had. It's a little bit nicer view. I think the data is a little bit more rich here in the private view, but this essentially it operates in the same way. So if I went to the federal contracting opportunities and I pull down my filter, you're going to see a lot of the same types of things, but here you're going to get an only DoD. So I don't believe that was available in the government tool, but it is here. So if I'm looking for that BAA waiver, so that filter is applied. And then I'm also looking for the NIAC code. So 3351, I'll just do a general lighting equipment. And now I start to see different contracting opportunities. It'll say it's in pre-solicitation phase, no set aside used. You'll just start to see these opportunities, the light tower, floodlight assemblies, window lighting fixtures, those kind of things, headlamps. So these are tripod lights. So these are now based just simply on saying, I want to sell to the Department of Defense, and I want to sell just in the category group of the electrical lighting, etc. This is the NIAC code I've used. And then you click in and you can see here the people and activity. I've got an example that shows a lot more information here. So some things have a lot of information, some don't. But this is essentially what one of the paid tools looks like.
And this is covering only the American tendering opportunities. It's only focused on the United States.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right. So then let me go to my next tool. All right. So this is Demand Star. Again, I don't have any affiliation with them. I've used them in the past, but that was for a larger company that was willing to pay for it. So you can see here the different types of plans, and like, again, I think this very nicely summarizes the difference between bidding at the federal level and at the state and local level. You can get all of the bids in the US for $25 a year for all federal agencies. But if you want to start at the state level, each state is $25 per year. So maybe you're only selling in Texas or Florida, and that might make sense for you. But if you're looking to sell to the states nationwide, so you're looking for local, state, and federal, it's about $2,400. Again, not a huge business cost, but it's, I think it's a lot of money. And so like, just to be prepared for what, like the different types of packages and how they might be priced and, what your plan. So maybe your reseller, one of the considerations is your reseller already has a tool like this. So this might be an interview question when you're looking to see if, like, I want to use someone based here in the United States. Do they have a well-established opportunity search program going? What tools do they use? So maybe those are some costs that you can save yourself when you're looking to come here to the US. All right.
Also the previous portal has the similar costs. So more or less, this is the range of investment.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Okay.
again, I'm just picking these at random. These tools, some I've had experience with in the past. Again, I'm not recommending one over the other. It's just,
And
there is a difference.
You can download all the documentation from this portal, from the free of charge portals like sam.gov or spending, free of charge. You can download the whole pack of the documentation, or you have to pay for it additionally.
No. If it's a .gov website, you do not need to pay for it.
Okay.
Because it's hosted by taxpayer dollars, and so it's meant to be a free tool for all taxpayers.
Okay. No, because we had the experience from Canadian, and it's not like this. There's only the main information, let's say the abstract of the tender, and then you have to purchase separately also specific documents or buy a pack, even if it's a public service. So.
Oh, really? Okay. So no, so that's not the way it works here. The other thing I would say is that because there's the whole transparency in government purchasing as a general philosophy or in the law here, all public tender documents are considered public domain unless there's a specific call out, like maybe they're bidding on a cruise missile system and it's classified information, and like obviously that's not public information, but most public tenders would be not only the bid documents, but the actual award notices, the evaluation criteria, all of that would be considered free and open to the public, so that, you know, the individual person or companies can do audits. They have a basis for potentially protesting an award, so they can see if the process was truly transparent or if something wasn't followed correctly. So that's mostly why these documents would be free.
Okay.
Cool. Now I will
Good
say,
news.
yeah. Hey, look, I try to save you a buck anywhere I can. Now I will say that the free, like sometimes all of the documents may not be there. That's not an effort to say you need to pay for them or they're trying to prevent you, but there's just so, like 5 million contracts go out. These people are dealing with maybe hundreds of opportunities in a given month that they've got to, you know, the contracting officer has to go through. They might miss an attachment, they may not put it up. So like you might have to actually go to I've had to do this before, go to the agency website or email the contracting officer to ask for something that is referenced in other documents, but I don't see it. So that does happen occasionally, but that's
And
more human error.
I have these contact details listed in the documentation or in the information. So who can I contact in case I have some queries or there is some documents missing?
Yeah, so that's generally in there. You'll see the contract officer listed. And so that's who
Okay.
you would contact. And we'll actually get into that here in a second.
Okay.
All right, so eligibility requirements. The goal of this, so now we've moved out of the how to search for opportunities. We've moved out of the module 1 follow-ups. So now we're moving into how are you as a European company eligible to bid on this? So the goal out of this module is I'd like you to understand at a high level your ability to sell to the US government, what allows you to do that. And then also the criteria, does it change based on the sale or the type of bid that you're pursuing? So again, we've covered these in other modules, so I won't spend a ton of time on them, but to reorient ourselves, you'll need the GPA, so the Agreement on Government Procurement through the World Trade Organization, is what gives y'all the ability to bid on US-based jobs or US government jobs, and then we as Americans can bid on your jobs over in Europe or wherever. The other item here is the SAM registration. So if you plan to go direct to market, you'll need to register the full, all the things that we covered. If you're just planning to be a supplier or a subcontractor, I would highly recommend you get the unique entity ID, a much simpler process. And then again, make sure that your product under the Buy American Act can be considered off the shelf rather than an end product. So you have the GPA behind you, you've registered, you're a commercial off the shelf product. You're pretty much good to go in most cases. Other things that might limit you, and these would be bid specific or specific to the actual individual procurement rather than agency wide. So there might be some scope requirements. So this would be termed in a different word, would be technical requirements. So if your light only operates at 240 volts and the US government wants to buy 120 volt and you can't do that, then you don't meet the scope, and you can submit a tender or a response, but you will likely be disqualified because you don't technically comply with the scope. Another area that would be specific to the bids would be the set-asides. So maybe you need to have a woman-owned business, a small disadvantaged business, service-disabled, veteran-owned. We covered these in a prior training, but this is where a reseller would help you be able to comply with these type of things, because it's not you selling it, it's your reseller selling it. References, if it's a large enough job, they'll want to talk to other clients. So maybe the French embassy, you did some lighting work for them, and the State Department wants to make sure that you're good with providing 2-meter long halogen lights. They might want to talk to an official at the French embassy and say, how did this company do? Prior experience. So do you have similar contracts, whether with the US government or with an allied country's government? Again, maybe France or Italy or Germany or whomever, that you have experience and you can demonstrate prior experience. There might actually be certifications. So specific to this, and we'll actually get into this in the next training that we'll do in a week. You might have industry specific like UL certifications. Maybe there's some product testing to make sure that you don't have lead or other things in your products. If you're selling to agencies based out of California, there might be some state regulations around energy compliance and energy efficiency to combat climate change. So you might have to have those. And then there might be some legal considerations, like, do you have any findings against you? Meaning, have you had any contracts terminated? That will be a question that you'll need to answer potentially sometimes. Do your owners have a criminal history? Those can disbar you from, bidding on certain contracts. So again, these aren't things that apply to every single contract, but they are things that once you get past the Buy American Act and you're registered in SAM and you're ready to go, or you've got a reseller, maybe these apply to you as well. All right, so assuming that, none of y'all are criminals and, we've all, met all the criteria and we're good to go, what does the evaluation process look like? So here we're going to want to learn about the different types of evaluations. We're also going to want to learn about the process or standard concepts in the evaluation. Again, I think a recurring theme is that every purchase is unique. But again, it's the 80-20 rule. If I understand 20% of the theory, it applies to 80% of my procurements. All right, so the types of evaluations, again, there's many more, but very simply put, we've got the lowest price. Basically, it could be termed as lowest price technically acceptable, meaning that it complies with the base specifications and it's the lowest price, you're good. So I do have some examples of what this might actually look like. Let me share. And apologies for the jarring back and forth. All right, so this is what is a sample for a request for quotation. So this is, again, if we're looking at a purchasing matrix, it's the lowest price item. So maybe it's $10,000 or under, or it's absolutely under $250,000. So it's in that middle tier for the simplified acquisition. Here, this agency out of Arkansas, they're a judiciary, they're a court, likely a federal court. They're saying, please submit your quotations. We need a fixed price. It needs to be delivered within 60 days. And here's the address. And then this is the contracting officer. We'll get into some of these terms later, but this is while we're here, the item should be FOB destination. So I know not all of us are logistics experts or have worked in shipping, but it will behoove you to understand these terms. There's a certain classification of terms for the type of shipping and who pays. So maybe you pay the shipping fee, but the receiver pays the customs duties, or maybe you pay the customs duties and the shipment fees, and you also carry the insurance. And so what this term specifically means, and what most government contracts require, is that it's FOB destination, meaning there are no shipping charges or any charges related to shipping that are separately billed to the government. It doesn't mean that you have not, said differently, you can build shipping into your price, but you'll give that price as one price for light fixture A. It's inclusive of shipping, and customs duties and taxes and all the different transportation costs should be in your number. You should not give a cost for the lighting fixture and then a separate cost for shipping. So this is where this becomes important. So again, this isn't a huge document. It's 4 pages with some, just standard clauses and things like that. But this is what you can expect a request for quotation to look like. It's got a deadline. It tells you how to ship it, how long your offer needs to be good for, who do you need to contact, where do you need to deliver it. It'll list out simply what is being purchased. And then it'll list any applicable clauses out of the FAR that apply to this specific. So again, they're saying not all of these clauses apply. Like the California e-waste fee should not apply because this is in Arkansas. But I guess this is a standard template they use for doing that. Any questions on this quotation, this like very simple, basic type of request? Okay.
This is only request for quotation, so no other technical documentation is needed.
Correct. Yes. So again,
So
each
to prove, for example, the items that were listed in the table, I don't have to send a quotation and also attach the specific documentation proving that I'm offering what is asked for.
so there is what is asked for in the solicitation, and then there's what I think makes logical sense. So in that request, it did not ask for you to reply with technical specifications. But I would, if they don't know you, if it's one of your first projects here, you don't have a lot of name recognition, there's nothing to stop you from giving that information. And I would encourage you to give that information of, here's an introduction to us. I know you may not know us, but our products comply and exceed what you're asking for here. And you can use what they're trying to purchase, if they've got a specific name brand or a specific type of light, as your basis for what your product needs to do.
And they are not giving you in this kind of requests what is their budget that they can have. So you don't have any reference.
So you kind of do, because the purchasing thresholds will manage the type of budget or the type of cost that you're going to encounter.
Okay.
So for instance, if they're going for a request for quotation rather than a full RFP, you know that they're not over the $250,000 threshold.
Okay, yeah, correct.
But if they're not doing like a credit card purchase, they're above 10,000.
Okay.
So I know it's not like a super refined or detailed budget, but it gives you some guardrails.
Okay, because very often in Europe, also under in the contracts or in the tendering that is under thresholds, in any case, they are giving maximum. And they are then evaluating, considering the discount. So the lower price and discount that you will make for them. So you have some reference number, you say amount, you say, okay, this is this, and you can make your calculation accordingly.
Exactly. And then you can generally potentially do searches for closed bids that have already been issued, awards have gone out, and then you can see what the contract value is. And if you know what the government was asking for, and then you know what the final contract value is, you can kind of do some backwards math to figure out how much this thing was selling for. Like what was a winning price. All right, so this is the next example I wanted to go into, and it shows not only the evaluation, but the not BBA, sorry, BAA. I'll fix that in the final presentation. All right, so I'm going to GovTribe, and let me switch my views here. All right, is the page scrolling?
Yes, unrestricted
okay.
Lafayette.
Excellent. Okay, so here, this is they want to repair a parking lot and sidewalk lighting. And this is an overview of what you can see in here. It was posted on the 15th of August. It was updated around the 30th of August, and then it was due in early September. There's not been an award issued here. Otherwise, you'd see an award date over here. So this can give you some idea that, this closed in September, so the government got the bids, but for some reason they haven't issued an award. Maybe there were some clarifications, maybe there's interviews involved or something else, site visits, or something's happened to where this hasn't been awarded yet in mid-December, 3 months later. You can see here in this view, so we're using the GovTribe portal, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric, so NOAA is the one who, there's no set-asides used. You can also see here, hopefully you're now seeing the screen change with 5 files. Should be showing here, so you can now see, to your question, where do you get the documentation from?
Yeah. Okay.
And you'll also see here certain specific things. So there's a concept of wage determination. So for all federal contracts, there is a minimum wage that needs to be paid for labor. So there are 2 components here. There's sidewalk lights and there's repair of those lights. So there's installation labor. In this scenario, I could imagine that you are contracting with a reseller or an electrical contractor who is willing to go out in the field and do the installations, and you supply the lights. So you would be the subcontractor in this example, and then the prime contractor would need to look at the wage and labor charts. Let's see. Also here you're seeing time of COVID. This specific RFP required that they certify vaccinations of COVID-19. So you're supposed to here, along with your bid response, supply proof of vaccinations because you're going on site to a government facility. And this was likely during the time of when those restrictions were still in place.
It's for the workforce. that
Yes,
go into it. Okay.
absolutely. So again, you can see like, I can't anticipate what all the different forms are going to be, but you'll see the list of forms here and they'll call out. So what I will do here is I'll bring up the combined synopsis. And what I wanted to bring your attention to, so I'm downloading and I'll now have to switch my screen. Sorry. This is the solicitation that you are now seeing for the parking lot light, sidewalk light fitting. The areas I want to bring your attention to are starting on page 2, which is the evaluation criteria. You can see here that in this, it's listing 3 separate areas. Technical capability. Do you meet this, yes or no? So that to me is like a pass-fail type criteria, but it also could be graded. It doesn't say. The next thing that goes into your score as a vendor is past performance. So 2 current relevant references. So if you cannot provide those references, this is a pass-fail. It lists it down here, pass-fail. So you will automatically fail in the second criteria, meaning I would take that to mean your bid would not be considered for award. And then the third criteria here is lowest price. And they define it as, you know, lowest price technically acceptable. It's a fixed price, so you can't change it. And then the terms are net 30, meaning the government will pay you 30 days from acceptance. So that's a concept of how evaluation criteria are listed in RFPs. And they'll be listed differently. Go ahead, sorry.
Do they give the, how to call it? I missed the word. What is the most important in terms, for example, in Europe, very often we have in this kind of information also like the technical capability, it's worth 30% of the evaluation score, past performance 10%, price. So do we know how they will calculate it? What is the most important part, or they are just giving the general evaluation? Saying, okay, you pass all, and or there is any scoring grid or whatever?
Yes. So in item 2, they tell you pass fail. So there is no score. This is what I would consider, and it's in a slide as a mandatory requirement. Then you've got your score of, okay, assuming you pass all the mandatory items, how technically capable is it? And then what's your price? And your price will likely be the lowest bid gets 100% of the points. Okay. And then it's a sliding scale from there is how I've usually seen it implemented. So let's say, for instance, you gave a price of $100 for a fixture and someone else gave a price of $200 and there were only 2 bids, or there were multiple bids. You would get, because your price was $100, you would get 100 points out of 100 in that category. Someone else who is double your price would get 50 points. So they're scoring much lower. And then there are other, so, and then assuming someone had quadruple, or, so they actually, based on the total price range, they will allocate the points typically. Now, this is an example of where during the question and answer period, I would submit a question to the contracting officer and say, can you please clarify, are the technical and price a pass fail, or what's the grading criteria? In larger bids, I do see the weights put there, 20% for technical, where they have multiple, more than 2 or 3.
Okay.
Yep.
And then if they are quoting a statement of need, there is a document that is called statement of need, and I have to go through it and understand what are the technical requirements.
Absolutely. So here, in typically what I've seen as common practice is you'll have a combined synopsis or solicitation, and then it'll list out all the documents that go with this at the time of issuing. So you'll know, do you have all the documents or not, because they'll actually list them out in here. The other concept I wanted to bring your attention to was page 10. So here you can see the Buy American. you can start seeing the Buy American and the free trade agreements that are starting to be called out. So you can see that in this solicitation, the Israeli-American free trade agreement applies, and so Buy America doesn't apply. They also have the you can list the country of origin, you can list different things, but they also have from a free trade country. So you can see that Bahrain, Korea, Morocco, Panama, Peru, those are all considered free trade, so they get an exemption. And then you can also see down here that there was one for the WTO, a GPA. So now you're starting to see the GPA applies. So maybe here they were able to get an exemption based off of that. And you can start to see here where they, in this solicitation, the old threshold was 3,500. They raised it to 10,000 now for the micro purchasing threshold. So you'll see that there. And then there was a commercial off the shelf listing here. There you go. Control F if you're a Windows, your best friend on these things, I tell you. So you have to either be, whether it's a domestic end product or it is a COTS item. Again, this isn't anything different than what we've covered, but this is practically how you would see it called out in an RFP. And again, if you qualify as a COTS item, then you're fine. Or if you're a free trade from a free trade country, so maybe your product is not made in Europe, maybe it's made in Panama, or maybe it's made in Bahrain or Israel or wherever, then those would have free trade agreements, and then your product would not need to necessarily be considered a COTS item. So you can see how the different nuances, the different factors play into whether or not how you might attack getting a waiver. Okay, so that was what I wanted to show you out of that. All right.
Can I ask you also, there was a wages document.
Yes.
What does it mean? It means that they are highlighting the minimum or
yes, exactly. So
our,
let me
I
actually,
don't know, because
yeah.
in Europe we may differ in terms of understanding the wages or the payment procedure. So usually in Europe, the salaries are paid every month. The hourly rates or daily rates are differently accounted. What do they mean?
Great question. So I'm going to try to blow this up as much as I can. So this comes from the Department of Labor employment standards. So again, this is an example of the federal government's, the Congress said, you shall pay people the living wage, or you should pay them to the federal wage schedule. But they're actually leaving the details or the implementation of that wage schedule to the Department of Labor to define. So in that you'll see here, and so therefore they can make a general law that the Department of Labor can tweak as they need to, and that's who actually implements the law, is like the Department of Labor, not necessarily Congress. So here you can see they get super detailed. There's accounting clerks 1 through 3, there's court reporters, messenger couriers, a rental clerk, so a survey worker. So maybe you're on a construction project and you're surveying a site. Well, guess what? You need to be paying that person $15.56 an hour. And this is something that can be audited. So this is something that I would recommend the labor component of this. If you're like pursuing an installation job, I would absolutely partner with someone else that can handle being the prime contractor, and they can take responsibility for making sure all the wages are correct and reporting it and handling any audits and all of that. And you're simply get to just supply the item, the lighting fixture, and that's fine. I hope, does that make sense?
Yes, exactly. Okay. And
Excellent.
do I need to estimate the number of hours foreseen for the service also, and the typology of the professionals or figures, or not?
So
or is it too detailed?
That would be too detailed. So this applies to labor on federal projects. Think of like janitorial staff cleaning a building. You might think of construction workers laying a new driveway for a parking deck or something like that. It's not necessarily the wage of the people assembling your light fixtures. Okay. The other concept here that we've now talked about, the lowest price, we're now talking about the lowest responsive bidder. That term responsive means a lot. So this typically applies to now the highest level of purchasing, meaning $250,000 or more. You're no longer in the credit card threshold. You're no longer in the simplified acquisition threshold where you have a request for quotation. You're now in like a full-blown RFP, fully competitive, those kind of things. So this is where you get into the highest score, et cetera. I wanted to give you an example of the greenhouse light bid. And let me close some windows. I apologize. And switch over to. All right, so this is another bid, and this is for greenhouse lights. This is for, I think it was the Department of Agriculture, if I remember correctly. And in here, again, you'll see all the documents listed that you need. The attachment 2 is product specifications. There's your main solicitation document, the RFQ, the request for quotation. I believe it was attachment 1 I wanted to show y'all. And you can see here, you just click download and it downloads as a PDF or a Word or Excel or whatever the format may be. And let me change to this. All right, so here you'll actually see where they start calling out the terms and conditions. And this is where they start referencing the various FAR, again, federal acquisition regulations. This is like Department of Agriculture, et cetera. And what applies to the bid and not. There was an evaluation criteria. All right, so I hope you're seeing this now, that this is another example of how an evaluation criteria might be presented to you. So they're telling you that there are 3 factors that they're going to evaluate the offer on: technical capability, past performance, and price. So I think you're starting to see a theme, like basically what does the product do? Where have you done work before? Who can vouch for you, saying you've done good work? And then what's your price? And here they're telling you that the technical proposal, it's a pass fail. So you need to meet all of the criteria technically. Your light operates at 120 volts. It puts out 3,000 lumens or whatever. Like, it does these specific things. And if you do it in a different way, you need to provide the information that allows the contracting officer to say, yes, they meet this criteria, but in an alternate way. Otherwise, again, you'll fail, you'll be thrown out. Factor 2 is price. Cleanse is a term that you'll see on contracts. It's a commodity line item. Basically just means in a purchase order, the thing that they're purchasing is on a line. So you'll see cleanse 1, that's item 1. Cleanse 2, item 2 is another way of looking at that. So then again, you'll see the LPTA. They love their acronyms. This is what we've covered: lowest price, technically acceptable. So basically you pass the technical, and now it's just down to price. What did you do before? And then they'll also
sorry, Mark, one issue. I see in the paragraph that's quotes the lowest price, they have written only the lowest price offer will be evaluated for technical acceptability and past performance. So it means that they are starting from the end. So they are starting to evaluating for the price, and then if the price is low, or what does it mean lowest than the others? They are going through the technical evaluation. So
what this means is that in this, they're expecting, so let me see if I can give the use case here.
Yeah.
The way I'm reading this, the way it comes to me is that they're expecting multiple bidders, 5, 10, 20, however many. They're not going to spend time reviewing all 20 proposals. What they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, give me the bottom 2 or 3 in price. And then I'm going to look at their technical specifications, because the technical specifications may be 20 pages. Now, if I'm sitting there as a contracting officer or the buyer, I don't want to review 20 different vendors, 20 pages each of their technical offering. I'll focus on the 1, 2, or 3 lowest bidders and look at those. And then, I'm spending maybe 10% of the time, 20% of the time, instead of spending all of this time. Now I can get to other contracts. So that's how I view what they're doing here. But you are correct.
But it gives a lot of room for the redress processes.
It does. It is admittedly a flawed process.
Yeah.
And what they're covering themselves here is saying, hey, yeah, lowest price first, but then they've got to meet all the technical criteria. And so they're saying, look, technical is technical. Are you 120 volt or are you 120 volt? Like they're saying, if you pass all of that, then your price is good.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. And then so this gets to, I think, a larger point, which we'll get to in the later modules, which is, in my vernacular, would be a go or no go decision. So one of the things that I would do is when I first get this 15 or 20 page document, I would sit here and look at evaluation criteria. I would look at some of the legal clauses. Is there anything that just off the bat says, I don't want to bid this? And reading the way they've structured this, you might say in your judgment, they're never going to see the value in our product. We're never going to get to the second stage. They're only going to look at price. This isn't worth my time. So there's a whole process that you go through, and I'll run you through in later trainings how you might want to make that judgment, or how you might want to make that judgment call. Okay, so then the next one I've got for you. All right, so that takes us through lowest responsive bidder, lowest price. And then again, I wanted to reorient you. So now you're seeing this slide probably appear 2 or 3 times per training. Memorize this one. What is micro threshold? What is simplified acquisition? What is over? Because where you fall will dictate any number of things, from whether you comply with Buy America, how they purchase, do they even need to get a competitive offer? Do you have to use a reseller with a certain qualification? This is the basis for determining. So like you said, if you can figure out what their budget is, then you can figure out how they're going to be able to purchase from you. Said differently, you can also use how they're trying to purchase from you to figure out what their budget is. Was there a chat question?
Yeah, I just got notice from Antonella and Alberto that they have to leave sharply now because they are joining another meeting.
No worries. We can pick up.
Well,
No. We can pick up from here during the next session if that's all right with everyone.
Okay.
In
Bye.
the last minute or so, were there any other topics that y'all wanted me to take away between now and next week to research, like I did for Buy America or for the SAM registration?
Before coming back to this question, one question. Do the evaluators inform you about the evaluation results?
Yes.
All bidders. Did you
Yes.
get any feedback?
Yes. So that's one of the things that you can do, is request what's a conference afterwards, like a debrief is the terminology. And you can specifically request that through the contracting officer, and they will go through and give you how your bid stacked up.
Okay.
What the pricing different, how they evaluated you. And they can also sometimes, if you're receptive to it, say what you could have improved on, why they didn't select you, those kind of things. So yes, you can absolutely request that.
Okay. Okay, clear. No, because it's not always standard.
No, it isn't. And many times they won't even publish that on the government site. Like they'll have it in case they get audited, but it's not going to be available. You have to ask for it.
Okay. Okay.
Cool.
No, I will only have a question, but I will also do my research regarding the foreign companies assigned with the contracts. If it's simple to find them, if it's any searching tool that can, if the data are stored there by typology or geographically located companies, because it will show us a bit how it is considered also, and what is the percentage. So if we are speaking about 0.1% of companies, of there is like 5%, so it gives a bit of chance to start. And then also I would like to understand if there are any necessity to be personally there for some meetings with the tendering organizations.
So that'll be, I was hoping we get to it today, but that's a
Okay.
concept called a pre-bid conference. And
Yeah.
sometimes, depending on the job, you are required, but it'll usually be called out. And a lot of
Okay.
times they'll give a virtual option, but we'll cover that in the next
Yeah.
training.
Okay. Okay. So from my side, I think it's all. It's a lot of information. It's very
Yes.
complex. And the other one, but maybe you will cover it also next time, is if you can showcase some other websites from the more local level, like the state, maybe.
Yes, and so there's one, the state of Georgia happens to be my state. I've got that as an example of like their procurement process, how they go through
Yeah.
it and all of that. Yes.
And because we are used to in Europe, but for example, other organizations like, I don't know, universities, hospitals, are they considered public or government by the federal or state laws, or they are private and they are also going through some tendering process that we can consider?
Yes and no. So yes, there's some are considered, it depends which hospital. So some are government funded, like Grady would be an example here in Atlanta. It is funded by
Yeah.
the county and by
Yeah.
the state of Georgia, so it'd be considered a public entity. But then there's other ones like Emory University, which is considered private. Now they do belong to some healthcare consortiums that would bid for things on behalf of its individual members. So you would see a similar tendering. They tend to mirror what the government does.
Okay.
Actually, John can speak a lot better to the healthcare side of this, but like that would be a an example of yes.
Okay, but this is for on the state level, so it's the lowest level, let's say. The,
There's municipal below the state, but
yeah,
yes, just
exactly.
state and municipal.
And
yes.
the municipal levels are also using their own portals or like in
Yes.
general? Okay.
So that's why you're seeing the same price for a state as you see for the federal government, because they're saying each data source. And because
Okay.
each state and municipality is unique, that's why.
Okay. Okay, so maybe in our case, it's better to consider also at the beginning the municipal level or the state level than going through the federal.
No, opposite.
No?
The federal is
Opposite.
easiest because all the opportunities are fed into, it's a common data set across 300 different agencies. Whereas all 50 states have different procurement portals, different methods, ways they do things, their unique laws that apply to them. Then the municipalities, there's like 20,000 of them. Towns, cities, villages, they're all unique too. So learn the rules at the federal level, that's the easiest. And they're the biggest buyer. Like, I'm serious.
Okay. No, I was just, I was just considering the fact that maybe it's easier to procure some products, some specific products to the small entity than to the bigger one.
Well, and this is where a reseller relationship, like someone who's in the United States, understands their specific region or their locality. And this would be one of the interview questions I would ask any potential reseller is, what's your local market presence? What's your sales force? What relationships do you have? Do you know the purchaser for the city of Atlanta? Do you know for the state of Georgia? Like, how are you getting what other products have you represented? Like what's your sales, like, so those are, we'll get into that.
Okay. So that's all from my side. I have a lot of questions for the next session. So.
I'm loving these questions. They're great.
Okay. So thank you very much from my side.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Cheers, y'all. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.